Police arrived at the scene believing they already understood what had happened. The facts appeared straightforward, the statements seemed consistent, and the situation looked like one of those rare cases that wouldn't take long to solve. From the outside, it felt almost routine, another investigation that would soon be closed and filed away. But what the officers didn't realize in those early moments was that they were standing at the beginning of a case that would slowly unravel everything they thought they knew. A single detail, so small it was almost ignored, would later turn this investigation on its head and leave even experienced detectives stunned. This wasn't just a crime with a suspect, it was a story filled with hidden motives, misplaced trust, and a truth far stranger than anyone could have imagined. True crime often teaches us to look for clear villains and simple explanations, but the strange case of Jessie Morrison refuses to fit into that pattern. At first, everything pointed in one direction. The timeline made sense, the behavior of those involved didn't raise immediate suspicion, and there was no obvious reason to doubt the conclusions being drawn. Yet as investigators dug deeper, cracks began to form. Statements that once sounded reliable started to contradict each other. Small inconsistencies grew into disturbing questions. Why didn't certain actions match the emotions being displayed? Why did key moments in the timeline feel strangely incomplete? With every answer, new doubts emerged, forcing police to step back and reconsider the narrative they had accepted too quickly. This case became a powerful reminder of how easily assumptions can shape an investigation, and how dangerous it can be when the truth hides behind a convincing story. What followed was a twist so unexpected that it challenged not only the investigation itself, but the very idea of how well we can truly know the people we trust. Police officers didn't rush into this case with panic or confusion. In fact, their initial reaction was almost calm. What they were seeing appeared familiar, predictable, and disturbingly ordinary. Scenes like this had crossed their desks before, situations where emotions ran high, stories were messy, and the truth seemed to sit right on the surface. From the very beginning, there was a quiet confidence among investigators that this case would follow a straight line. Someone had been hurt, someone was present, and explanations were already being offered without hesitation. There was no dramatic chase, no immediate mystery, no sense that this investigation would demand years of scrutiny. At least that's what everyone believed in those first moments. Jessie Morrison was not a name that immediately triggered alarm bells within law enforcement. She didn't a stereotype of someone who would become the center of a deeply controversial case. To those who knew her, she appeared ordinary, unremarkable, and in many ways, forgettable. That's exactly why the case unfolded the way it did. When people don't stand out, their stories often go unquestioned. Familiar faces inspire trust, and trust can quietly shape conclusions long before evidence is fully examined. From the start, Jessie's presence at the center of the investigation felt almost natural, as if her involvement explained everything without needing further scrutiny. As officers began piecing together the early timeline, they relied heavily on verbal accounts. These statements flowed easily and confidently, delivered with just enough emotion to sound genuine, but not enough to seem exaggerated. There were no immediate contradictions, no obvious red flags, no dramatic inconsistencies demanding attention. Each explanation appeared to support the next, creating a narrative that felt complete. The kind of narrative investigators often hope for, one that doesn't resist, doesn't fight back, and doesn't complicate their work. But what seemed like cooperation would later reveal itself as something far more troubling. In true crime investigations, the most dangerous assumption is believing that honesty always announces itself clearly. Lies are rarely loud. They don't always come with nervous stutters or shifting eyes. Sometimes they arrive calmly, confidently, and wrapped in familiarity. This case would become a chilling example of how easily investigators and the public can accept a version of events simply because it feels reasonable. At this stage, no one was asking the deeper questions. No one was pressing too hard. And no one imagined that the narrative forming in those early hours would soon collapse under its own weight. As more details surfaced, the case continued to look deceptively simple. The timeline appeared tight, motives seemed obvious, and emotional reactions aligned just enough with expectations. Officers moved forward believing they were closing in on a resolution. But beneath the surface, something wasn't sitting right. Certain moments in the timeline felt rushed, as if crucial seconds or minutes had been brushed aside without explanation. Small details were glossed over, dismissed as irrelevant, or labeled as emotional confusion. These overlooked moments would later become the very cracks that exposed the truth. Jessie Morrison's behavior, while not overtly suspicious, carried a subtle inconsistency that's difficult to detect unless you know exactly what to look for. Her reactions followed the correct pattern, but they felt rehearsed rather than instinctive. Grief, shock, and fear often manifest in unpredictable ways, yet her responses seemed measured, controlled, and strangely consistent. At the time, investigators interpreted this as strength. Later, it would be seen as something else entirely. As the investigation progressed, trust became its own obstacle. Once investigators believe they understand a case, every new piece of information is filtered through that belief. Evidence stops being examined on its own merits, and instead becomes something to confirm what is already assumed. This phenomenon, known to many in law enforcement but rarely discussed openly, quietly shaped the direction of the case. Jessie wasn't being questioned as a potential source of deception. She was being treated as a witness to tragedy. What no one realized yet was that the truth was hiding in the smallest details. A misplaced object. A moment that didn't align emotionally. A statement that sounded right, but arrived too quickly. These details didn't scream for attention. They whispered. And in the early stages, no one was listening closely enough to hear them. As days passed, public perception began to take shape. Stories circulated, assumptions spread, and opinions hardened long before the full picture was known. Once a narrative enters the public consciousness, it becomes incredibly difficult to dismantle. People cling to the version of events that feels simplest, safest, and most emotionally comfortable. Jessie Morrison was already being viewed through a lens that would later prove dangerously misleading. The true tragedy of this case lies not only in what happened, but in how easily it could have gone unnoticed. Had one investigator not paused, not questioned a minor inconsistency, not felt that quiet sense of unease, this story might have ended exactly where it began, filed away as resolved. Instead, that single moment of doubt opened the door to a revelation no one was prepared for. And this is where the case truly begins to change.